Thank you kindly. I gotta say, that's a hard act to follow. I didn't bring any whistles or anything, but thank you very much. That was nice. Good afternoon, friends of FFD. After graduating from the University of Helsinki with a master's in agroecology a little less than a decade ago, I moved to Bahir Dar, Ethiopia, due to my spouse's work. Quite soon after the move, I learned that a Finnish organization called the Finnish Agri-Agency for Food and Forest Development Finland, or more recently, Food and Forest Development Finland, was looking for a junior officer for a project focused on forestry, agroforestry, and timber marketing. So I applied for the job, eventually got it, spending the following 2 years stationed at a local cooperative union there in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia. Now we are here celebrating the 10-year anniversary of FFD. Thank you, Tina, for the invitation and for the job all those years ago. My name is Atte Penttilä, and since the mentioned job and subsequent other employment opportunities with FFD, I've entered the realm of research. I'm a food system and a resilience researcher at E2 Research, an independent research organization here in Helsinki. I hold a PhD in cultural anthropology with a specific focus on the environment and agricultural communities. My past research has investigated, for example, the effects of banana plantations to riverine environments and farmer communities in Belize, and of the Russian attack in Ukraine on Ukrainian seasonal workers and Finnish farmers. But more in relation to the topic of the day, my dissertation research focused on the activities of the AgriCord Alliance, the agri-agencies under that alliance, FFD being one of them, as well as the supported farmers' organizations, funders, during the global COVID-19 pandemic. The title of my speech today is Farmers for Sustainable and Responsible Food Systems and Forestry, from Local Action to Systemic Change. It's a mouthful, but for a reason. What becomes clear from the title is that there is some sort of a goal. The goal is to change something, to make something different, right? And not only change a little bit, but on a system level. There are also instructions in the title on how to reach that goal. In order to enact systemic change, local action needs to take place. With knowledge of the climate disaster, soil depletion, biodiversity loss, or any other crises affecting agriculture and forestry, the system, guided by globalized markets and trade, has not, unfortunately, radically changed. This is why local action is the leverage point, the place in which to intervene to begin the transition. The title holds more instructions. There are certain characteristics that must be embedded within the catalysts as well as the end results of the wanted change. They need to be sustainable and responsible. Sustainable on the local level means that the farming or forestry activities are such that they can be continued by the next generation. They are environmentally sound, that they provide a decent livelihood, and that they are resilient in all those mentioned aspects. On the system level, according to the UN, a sustainable food system is one that delivers food and nutrition security for all in such a way that economic, social, environmental bases to generate food security and nutrition for future generations are not compromised. With forestry, similar system-level definitions apply without the focus on food and nutrition. Responsible then refers to the idea of all aspects of the food system being fair, just, bereft of inequality. Ideas of equity are at the heart of a responsible system. Lastly, we have the protagonists, the central characters, the farmers and farmers' organizations, right? And farmer families and communities in continuation. This is where FFD has now operated for a decade. This is where local action takes place. This is where change begins. But we must acknowledge that transition can only come through if many actors across the system work together. Here in the agricultural development context, the main actors who are also present in this room and online are donors, such as the IFAD, EU, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Finland, who fund the operations in the Global South, the AgriCord Alliance, organizations such as FFD and other agri-agencies, and the farmers and farmer groups supported by the previous. Thereafter, markets and so on play a role, of course. But what is important to note is that while there is need to create change, change is also ever present in the landscapes. farmers and forest owners, especially in the global south, are witnessing the effects of climate change and environmental degradation on their lands. The old saying of fighting fire with fire transforms into fighting change with change. Adaptation is necessary, but adaptation requires effort. It requires funding, and it requires collaboration. Good examples of that collaboration are the Building Resilience Toolkits designed by AgriOrg FFD and other agri-agencies in the Alliance, which farmers' organizations can use to analyze climate risks and FO vulnerabilities, build resilience needed to overcome challenges brought on by the changing climate. What is often the case is that the same actions and activities that improve resilience, climate or other, are also fiscally sensible. For example, the 2019 report on Global Commission on Adaptation found that every dollar invested in adaptation could generate between $2 and $10 in economic benefits. Therefore, funding for climate change activities can and should, if properly directed, be seen as poverty reduction methods as well. Remember that these aspects, the environment and livelihoods, are integral to sustainability thinking. Furthermore, poverty reduction has a tendency to decrease local level environmental pressure, although it must be mentioned that the vast majority of emissions and subsequent environmental degradation on Earth are derived from the wealthy. According to Oxfam, 1% of humanity are responsible for twice as many emissions as the poorest 50%. Yet the fact is that failing to tackle and adapt to climate change would severely increase poverty. So if change is what is wanted, what are the processes that may lead to it? So cultures are static. Cultures are not static. They evolve and adapt through time, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. Alongside globalization, the social media changes cultures all over the world quite rapidly. Food cultures are not static either. They serve tortillas in Finnish schools now. They didn't when I was young. Agricultures are not static either. The things we grow change due to necessity, for example, because drier conditions require drought-resistant plants, or we want to eat different things, such as a more plant-based diet, or the opposite. Sometimes the catalyst for change is a sudden crisis that requires immediate attention. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, dependencies on imports were highlighted, and local solutions were needed to tackle them. But sometimes change is more gradual, taking its time, seeping its way into our food systems, production and consumption, and everything in between. Forestry as well. In Finland, felling methods and carbon storage, for example, have been under public debate. Trends come and go, and with trends, funding often comes and goes as well. The ebb and flow of international development funding creates barriers for systemic change to take place. Gradual system and landscape level change requires long-term commitment to local efforts. We just heard that it took 5 years to get coffee to Tina's hands now. Climate funding should be focused on this type of long-term effects. Unfortunately, according to Climate Policy Initiative, less than 2% of global climate finance goes to smallholder producers, representing 95% of world's farms. Whether fast or gradual, change needs a catalyst. As an example, one seemingly efficient catalyst for change is certification, often driven by the demand of consumers in the global north. If certification is a catalyst for change, what type of change are we talking about? What is the goal of certification? Well, usually they're created for environmental, socioeconomic, or food standards reasons, as we heard this morning as well. For smallholders, the possibility of receiving higher incomes is a strong incentive for certification. Nonetheless, to be certified, certain requirements must be met, requiring financial inputs, and most often training, meaning funding or investments. Investments may be available in contract farming schemes, for example. But in the agricultural development context, support for certification usually comes from donors. Studies show that certification systems are developing at such a high rate that smallholders are having difficulties in keeping up. Companies are setting up their own private sustainability standards, for example. So how can smallholders be expected to join several different certification schemes? there needs to be harmonization of standards. But what is also needed is thinking about smallholder farmers as more than mere suppliers, aligning their activities on farms and forests to the desires of consumers or companies in the north, especially if they create barriers to smallholders to access markets without any support. All that being said, an hour or two ago, I had the pleasure of participating in a workshop where FFD's partner farmers organizations underlined factors important for change to occur. The change here is seen as something that tackles some of the aspects of a sustainable and responsible system, which I underlined earlier. I heard stories from several FFD partners in Tanzania and Vietnam. There were many factors that were mentioned. I will shortly introduce a few of them. The first one is organizational establishment and development. The idea of power in numbers is not new to the Finnish audience, or Swedish for that matter. Our history in agriculture and forestry is entwined with cooperative thinking. This can be seen as a first step that should be followed by many others. A strong organization helps with negotiations with markets and market actors, can offer, for example, training and capacity building for members. A strong organization often has more satisfied members. Participatory identification of needs and design of actions based on them was important. It's been found that any agricultural or rural development is more sustainable if it is based on actual needs of farmers and forest owners. So we must ask. Certification has indeed been found helpful, but not only the certification as such, but the training related to production methods and prevention of post-harvest losses has improved incomes of farmers. We just heard about this morning. Focusing on research-based activities is important. The research can be market research or any other. If the desire is to sell a product, there needs to be a market for that product. Research is, of course, also very important in climate change adaptation. As the final point, what I mentioned earlier about long-term commitments was brought up as a hindering factor. It takes years to effect change. And then when it is about to happen, projects often end. We need to target climate finance to smallholders, make it long-term, and make it flexible. Today, we will hear more of the results of FFD from the last decade. But for now, I want to say thank you to the FOs here today, the farmers organizations, and a happy anniversary to FFD. Thank you.